Coach DeMarco here with Get Better Basketball Live, and I have Coach Jake Nannen joining me again today, head basketball coach at Elkhorn South High School in Nebraska. Coach, thanks for joining us again.
Absolutely. Looking forward to continue the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Me as well. And we left off, we were talking about the Rose series. We were talking about fingers cuts and fan cuts. And I know you're really excited to talk about fan return. So let's jump right into it.
Absolutely. So we know that fingers cuts and fan cuts are certainly our fastball, but we know that there's going to be some teams that can take away our fastball. So we need to make sure that we have some type of changeup or curveball in our arsenal. And within our 5-out drive in space, we have different triggers that we can use conceptually to flow in and out of different actions, which is one of the best parts about the 5-out drive in space. So in our diagrams here, once player 1 passes across the floor to player 5, we know that if 1 decides to fan cut, player 2 is going to automatically strong cut up to the nail. And player 5 is automatically going to pound and pitch to boomerang it right back to 1. Now, if player 1 can shoot it or rip it baseline, that's great. We are still in drive in space. We're still looking to attack off of cuts. But if player 1 does not have an advantage, we ask them to return it back up to the action spot. And this serves as our trigger that we are now in a new offensive action. All the players on the court now know that we are in a different offensive series because player 1 returned the pass back up to the action spot. 2, we now have a shape change, which we can see in diagram 2 down here. We are now 4 out, 1 in with a player at the nail. We are now in fan return. And we describe fan return as our curveball, right? Our secondary create action to complement our fastball of Rose series. And the great thing about fan return is we can really use it to trigger any offensive action that we'd like. We like to use it for Princeton Chin or Princeton Point series, but you can really do anything that you would like. So not going to take the time to watch any videos right now. Again, at the end, Coach, if people would like to reach out and contact me, I'll have my contact information. I'm more than willing to share any of the clips that we have, but just for timing's sake, don't want to dive too deep into that right now. But that is fan return, kind of our second offensive trigger that allows us to attack the defense in a different way.
All these actions flow and complement each other, but just seeing fan return, I was more of a 4-out, 1 in than 5-out, and it's got my mind flowing a little bit like, oh, these are some things that can happen kind of naturally off of this. So I like it's like an amoeba. I know there's a defense called the amoeba zone, but this offense really can morph into so many different things. It's really tough to game plan for. I'm a really defensive minded coach, and I'm like, as we make adjustments defensively, there's things that are going to flow naturally in the game for the offense. This is very difficult to game plan for, and I can say that firsthand. Seeing you talk about it, and as someone who is really defensive minded.
Absolutely, Coach. And the best part of it is it doesn't need a play call from the sideline. It is all player led, and you can really adjust this fan return action even throughout the season, right? If your Princeton Chin is not working well for you, you can easily adjust to Princeton Point or some type of ball screen because it really would just be like another set within your offensive flow. So we really like fan return as our curveball to our fastball of the Rose series.
Coach, I just
Now,
want to mention one more thing here, and that's the element of trust in your players. A lot of coaches watching this, and there's no play calls. I was a dribble drive coach, right? So 4 out, 1 in, and it was all read and react. Very similar to this. We had some actions we could flow into, but there's an element of trust that you develop with your players, and it's really what you're doing in practice is preparing them to make these decisions in games. And it's important for coaches to understand that. How do you develop that trust? So could you just talk just quickly about that? I want to let you keep rolling here because there's a lot of good stuff coming up, but that aspect of trusting your players to make these decisions. And was that something that was hard for you as a coach? And how do you do that? I know for me, it was a learning process and it was a learning curve as I went to dribble drive. I'm just curious to hear from you for those coaches who are watching this.
absolutely. I think the way that you earn the trust of your players and vice versa is to allow them to explore those things in practice and giving them those A, B, and sometimes C options to explore within the structure of your spacing template and some of the actions that you have. So I would 100% say that teaching these triggers, so to speak, which is a fairly new modern idea, especially for high school kids, is very difficult. But it's no different than repping your favorite 3 offensive sets. That's just something that really is a necessity with this style of play. And you must be okay with players making mistakes and using the game to encourage players to make those mistakes turn into progress and learning from those lessons. And, gosh forbid a player shoots a 3 when they should have driven it, or gosh forbid a player tries to rip it off a boomerang instead of returning the pass back up to the action spot, right? But as we mentioned, there are certainly better versions of right. And that's when we let the game do the teaching. So to answer your question, yes, it's difficult to trust players, but I do believe it will make your offense better in the long run. And it does provide some player ownership to your system.
Great points, Coach. We saw it with our offense. We also were a run and jump team on defense. There's a lot of decision making there. You have to trust players when they're going to go and they're going to run and jump. And it can be done. It can be done at the high school level. I think we're both sort of living proof of that. And I know Coach Casio coached at the high school level for a lot of years before stepping up to college. So it can be done. But great feedback and advice for coaches. So I'm excited to learn a little bit about putting the defense in a blender here.
Oh, yeah. So, Coach, I cannot move on to bounce outs until we talk about this down, up, over passing sequence. This concept that we learned from Coach Casio is absolutely life-changing, and I'm not being dramatic. And if you run any type of 2-guard front, down, up, over is a fantastic way to generate some great ball speed, put the defense in the blender, and force really long closeouts. And we would define a down, up, over as when the ball gets deep into the paint or touches the corner, and we make a pass out to the perimeter or up the floor. We already talked about we always go over after a pass up the floor because that allows us to get into Rose series, right? And that's our fastball. That's our primary create action. And another benefit of down, up, over is especially in transition, when the entire defense is sprinting back towards the baseline, if we can hit the corner and go up the floor against the grain and then go over into a fingers cut or a fan cut, I mean, Coach, it's unguardable in a sense, especially when you're doing it with purpose. So if I may, I'd like to show a quick few clips of this down, up, over sequence. Let me know if it's getting choppy. That happens sometimes.
No,
But
it's
throughout
great, Coach. And this is a great example of that ball movement. You've talked about those 0.5 decisions and moving the ball quickly and playing with some pace and open up those gaps.
Absolutely. And, instead of telling players, hey, move the ball or make that one more pass, it's really just, hey, guys, let's go down, up, over. Let's get the ball moving a little bit. So you can see that in some of these clips. When the ball hits the baseline and we pass up to the action spot, our players are almost already looking over to the other action spot because it's an automatic in our offense. So we believe this down, up, over is absolutely beautiful. It's a concept that works against man or zone. You could install it in a day. And man, I really think this is really, like I said, a life-changing concept. Something so simple that really does put the defense in a blender. And most importantly, lets us get right back into Rose series, our fastball. So, Coach, not going to take too much time to dive into our swing action. Again, if coaches want to reach out to learn more about what the swing action is, more than welcome to share. Won't spend too much time on dribble penetration or what we call cracking the shell for sticky language when we drive inside the three-point line. But this would be our typical progression for players. And our rim decisions are absolutely critical. We need our players to know when they should rack it, what type of advantage they have. We need them to know when they should counter move with a spin back or when they need to Euro step with a help defender's chest in front with a big advantage. When we're driving into those double and triple gap space that our cuts create, we're not always going to be able to create an advantage. Sometimes defense is going to keep their chest in front of the ball, whether they slide under the fingers cut. Maybe they switch. And our players need to recognize that we are now neutral. There's a primary defender in front. So we could spin move and keep attacking, or we could bounce out to the next offensive spot. And this bounce out serves as another offensive trigger into a different action. So now we have our Rose series triggered by a pass across the floor. We have our fan return pass, which can trigger another offensive series as a curveball. And now we have our bounce outs, which is what we would consider a slider. So now we're really starting to add to our pitching arsenal. We're changing our method of attack and hopefully becoming really hard to guard. Now, with these bounce outs, we choose to use our bounce outs to flow into an inside flare screen. That would be similar to the second progression of Princeton Chin, where after that high post sets the back screen, they're turning and setting that flare screen. It's the exact same idea. So let's say that in diagram 1 here, player 1 is passed across the floor to player 5 and fingers cuts to that ball side corner. Now, player 5 is deciding to attack that triple gap into big space, but they don't have that advantage. They see primary defender has chest in front, and they decide to bounce out to the next offensive spot. And that's our visual trigger. All players on the floor now see that our player has bounced out, and everyone on the court should be communicating, hey, bounce out, bounce out, bounce, bounce, bounce. And that's our our vocal combination with our visual aid. And now all players on the floor know we are in a different offensive series. We are no longer looking to attack off of fingers cuts or fan cuts. We are looking for our inside flare screen. So for us, off of a bounce out, we automatically go 2 passes out of the bounce out. And the original player that bounces out is going to get to about the elbow-ish area. Sometimes we have them straddle the 3-point line, and they're going to set a flare screen for player 4, who passed down to the stretch. And we like to think about player 4 as walking their man down to that 3-point line and then drifting up towards the top of the key. And our sticky language is we just want player 4 to, sneak out of a conversation they don't want to be in. We are in no rush to drift to the top of the key because we're in a different action, right? We can 2 count off the catch now. And we really want to make sure that on those inside flares, we're catching at the top of the key, because if we catch too far over, we're going to constrain space. And right now we have about a double gap and a half for player 4 to shoot it or rip it right. And then we're right back into our drive and space game. So
Coach,
bounce out.
I
Go
was
ahead,
just going to
Coach.
say, I'm glad that you brought up communication. We talk a lot about it on defense, but you guys talking about your players, you talking about your players communicating, bounce, bounce, bounce in this situation and communicating with each other verbally. Maybe there's some hand signals, whatever it might be. But communication is really important on offense as well. Especially, I would imagine if you're going to be successful when there's different triggers and different flow ways you're going to get into off a bounce out, this look, or different things that are going to happen. I would imagine that players have to communicate with each other as these things are happening as well.
Absolutely. And that's where we really emphasize that vocal and visual aid. I mean, whatever we can do to have players have that shared cognition, because it really does take one player to not know what's going on, to, I wouldn't say mess up the trigger, but allow it to not flow as smoothly as it could. So absolutely, vocal, visual, shape changes, everything that we can use for players to understand we're in a different series. So we choose to use that inside flare screen. We can also flow into a ball screen out of it. We can get into our Princeton point. You can even flow into a double stagger off of the bounce outs. So, Coach, let me know if you need me to draw
I
up
have
anything.
just one more question as I'm watching this. And you mentioned obviously this is a flare, but you can flow into other actions. When you're scouting teams and you look at what they do defensively, will you adjust and say we're going to use a ball screen or we're going to go to 77 or whatever it might be, or any type of action that you might use in that situation? But is that something that you'll look at? Do you guys always go with the flare, or are there some games you're like, you know what, if we bounce out in this game, we can take advantage. They don't defend ball screens well, so let's make that our go-to? Or does it fluctuate at all, or is it always, do you stick with the same thing?
For us, we have only ever used the inside flare. So we wouldn't be able to tweak it game by game. But say our inside flare wasn't working throughout the course of a season, we could easily say, all right, guys, inside flare has kind of ran its course. What do you guys think about flowing into our get game out of this? Or, hey, we don't set a lot of ball screens. Would you rather have player 4 pass down and cut away, and then player 5 come set a spread ball screen for you?
Mhm.
So, to your point, it would be very difficult to do so on a game by game basis,
Mhm.
but we could certainly scrap, adjust, or eliminate as the season progressed.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, coach. And I feel like as coaches are watching and they see, I love the flare. I mean, I think there's difficult to defend. There's a lot you can do off of it. Not to mention the player setting the flare screen could open up off it as well, because obviously you might get two to chase the flare and you might open him up. So a lot of different options that you're going to get out of it. Just curious if there was some flexibility. It sounds like there is, and other coaches might have personnel that might be more conducive to setting a ball screen or the get action, as you talked about, or the flare. So there's some different options, within this, which is awesome.
100% fit to your style. And like I mentioned, coach, we would certainly consider the bounce out as our slider. We do want to keep that attack mentality, and we can use a counter spin move if we do see chest in front. But a bounce out is a really good protection plan for us to keep our possession alive. And usually, coach, if defense is keeping their chest in front on fingers cuts, we probably need to change our method of attack anyway because they're taking away our fastball.
So, coach, I'm excited to jump into the next piece because I know there's a lot of coaches that are interested in the Princeton offense and, in particular, the point series. So, the get game. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned before, we really do like to blend our drive and space game and Rose series with some Princeton action. We think it's a really good way to attack the defense in a different way. So, with our get game, aka our Princeton point series, this is nothing that we have to become the masters of. This is a small portion of our offense. So, we just have to get good enough at it. So, once we feed the nail or the elbow with our shape change, we give our players the three options of cut it, turn it, split it. That's our sticky language. And we only split away. The reason we only split away is because it's really easy for player 4 in this diagram to get confused with turning it and getting the handoff from 2, or 2 might have trouble recognizing if they're going to go split over. So when we split it, we only split away. Now, we've talked all night about triggers and how we can conceptually understand that we're in a different offensive action besides Rose series, but we do use get game a lot for calls from the sideline to start neutral possessions with screening game. We would call that a ref touch when we might look to call some Princeton point out of a set. And we can also get into get game with a shape change when the player's coming to the nail. And we always like to tell our players that the worst decision is indecision. I think you've heard us say that a lot tonight, and it's so true. We're not going to get too upset if a player cuts it when they should have turned it, or split it when they should have cut it, because the worst decision is indecision. We would rather have a player make the wrong cut quickly than the correct cut slowly. Now, some triggers that allow us to naturally flow into get game could be our fan return, which we talked about earlier, where player 1 decided to fan cut out of Rose and passed it right back up to the action spot. Another way that we can flow into our get game would be with fan swing. That's something we didn't talk about tonight, but as player 1 passed across the floor to player 5, we know that player 5 has that DPO option, right? They could drive right into triple gap, or they could pass left through single. And in this case, player 5 chose to pass down and cut away. And player 4 now recognizes, okay, there's a strong cutter coming to the elbow. This is a shape change. I shouldn't look to get off the rails and drive middle because there's someone cutting to the elbow. Let's let common sense prevail. I need to play through the strong cutter. And then another action we have is chasing the down up over. We don't have time to talk about that tonight, but there are a lot of different ways that we can conceptually flow into our Princeton point or get game, whether it's out of our typical point template or our jungle template. And again, we just want players to go. We don't really care what option they choose. Cut it, turn it, split it, and let's find a way to attack the defense in a different way. So I'll play a few videos of our get game action. So this first clip would be a way that we could flow into it conceptually. We can see we got into some fan return, weren't able to create an advantage here, and that's okay. Here would be some get game out of a call. We're flashing someone to the elbow, and this player decided to cut it. Almost like a give and go. Here's another cut it. Just letting players play. So our Princeton point or our get game, like I said, is nothing we need to get super duper good at. We don't need to be the masters of the point series, but we just need to be good enough at it where we can attack the defense in a different way. And we do really like this point series out of neutral starts, play calls from the sideline. And I think, Coach, we end with some split it action here. Just trying to get some clips of all of the different ways that we can use our Princeton point. We try to be pretty unique with the way we flow into it with our modern spacing template. So that's just some ways that we can use Princeton as another way to attack the defense.
Love
And
it,
here's a
Coach.
good final.
Love the spacing, love the ball movement. Even even when you guys are in the Princeton and the point action, you guys are, moving the ball quickly, making the defense work. I feel like, if playing against an offense like this, your defense has to be on point. No pun intended with the point series on offense, but you really have to be on top of your game the entire possession. You can't take a possession off. You can't, and you have to do that anyways. But I feel like the way that you guys flow and move and space and attack, it's constant, and it's almost like you keep you're hitting the defense, boom, boom, and then you knock them out, and you make that back cut, get a layup, and then you come back the next possession, you're peppering them, you're moving, you're cutting, you're spacing, you're passing, then boom, you get an open 3-pointer. And the possessions I was watching there and the earlier ones, it's like very, very difficult to defend because it's not one player that's making all the plays. You're moving the ball. Everyone's involved. I think it's a really great team offense as well, which I know a lot of coaches value. And I'm sure if you have a great player that stands out, they're going to play well in this system also. But just so many positives as I'm watching it. I'm kind of thinking out loud, like, wow, I love that. I love this. I love that. So many, many positives I'm seeing here.
Absolutely, Coach. The best part is it is all seamless flow. Like we talked about at the very beginning, it's very free flowing. All of these concepts and actions mesh together and fit like a puzzle, and there's really no endings or resets. Nobody stops the ball from moving, and those triggers allow us to do so seamlessly. And then, Coach, I figured we could end with some off ball movement. I would say this is kind of the goods that really does help everything flow. Like I mentioned, we feel like a lot of teams can arrive spaced and organized, but we feel like the good offensive teams can keep their spacing throughout a possession. So these dribble penetration reaction rules are absolutely critical to what we do. And we feel like they're pretty simple. So, generally speaking, Coach, from a player's perspective, when the ball is being driven at me, a good general rule of thumb is to hold space, locked and loaded, shot ready. Specifically in the corner, we really like to use the thought process of your turn versus my turn. Right now, as player 2 in our first diagram attacks triple gap left, player 1 is thinking in their mind, it is player 2's turn to make a play. It is my turn to hold space and allow my teammate to do so. And a good quote unquote trigger that we can use of when player 1 might need to lift to give their teammate help would be if player 2 came to a 2-foot stop.
Mm-hmm.
That would be our cue or our signal for player 1 to now lift up a little bit because their teammate now needs help. And the B option for a player that's holding space in the corner is to burn cut or back cut to the basket. Remember, we only basket cut with advantage. So we use the phrase, you turn, I burn. If my defender loses sight of me, I should burn cut, and I might be able to get a layup out of that. With that being said, we are very, very on the extreme end of holding space. When in doubt, hold your spot locked and loaded. We generate a ton of catch and shoot stationary threes, especially from the corner. And we believe that really increases our percentage. Catch and shoot threes turn good shooters into great shooters into elite shooters. And that is one of the main reasons why we hold that space. Now, our stretch rule is a little different. When in doubt, let's hold, locked and loaded. But in diagram 2 here on the right, player 1 is now attacking a double gap as we have two side of the floor. And player 3 is going to hold space when the ball is being driven at them until the ball gets below them. That is a proper time for player 3 to start lifting up to the action spot. And that might unlock a pitch back for player 3 to have a catch and shoot 3, or for player 3 to catch on the run, stampede the catch, and get off the rails and drive again. So we're always having our players ask themselves, your turn versus my turn. Does my teammate need help, or do they need space? And those would be two important rules for when the ball's being driven at us. And a good rule of thumb before we talk about the opposite, when the ball is being driven away from me, a good general rule of thumb that we call the golden rule is whenever the ball gets inside the paint with our 5-out spacing template, we need to have our 4-out spacing filled. When the ball is in the paint, we need both corners filled and we need both action spots filled. That unlocks some second cuts for us. That unlocks our down up overs, and it really helps us keep our spacing. And for when the ball is being driven away from me as a player, my mindset is I always fill behind and square the top, and I must sprint to do so. So as player 3 in diagram 1 gets off the rails and attacks triple gap space, player 5 and player 1 are holding, shot ready, locked and loaded. And player 2, as the ball's being driven away from them, is filling behind and squaring the top, aka filling an action spot. And a more frequent scenario would be over here in diagram 2, where player 5 is attacking triple gap right. Player 3 and 4 now have the ball driven away from them. Oh, snap. That's my cue. I need to sprint to fill behind and square the top. And just some other final basic motion offense rules. If someone's cutting to my corner, I'm just going to bump up a spot or maybe 2 up to that action spot. And if I do make a pass to the perimeter, I can either escape to any corner or I can punch, which is our sticky language for a penetrate, pitch, and post. Now, our roster makeup did not allow us to do a lot of punching this year. We were pretty small across the board, hence us running the 5-out drive in space, I suppose. But when we're passing on the run out to the perimeter, we're thinking escape. But if I pass out to the perimeter after a 2-foot stop, I'm probably thinking punch. So that would be a way that we can trigger a punch, would be a 2-foot stop inside the paint.
I
So
appreciate that you brought up the punch, coach, because I feel like there's some teams that might have the personnel to do that and get that ball back inside. So it's a good option. It just shows how diverse this offense is. There's so many different options out of it.
absolutely, coach. So I would say that's a crash course on the 5-out drive in space. And there are some other actions that we can use to help keep our offensive flow and attack the defense in a different way. But again, coach, I wouldn't be where I am at coaching wise without some of these people I learned this offense from. Whether it was Mark Cassio at Courtside and Savvy, Tyler Costin, Doug Novak, John Leonzo. I've watched some of your transition stuff. You name it. I'm always picking brains and I'm always stealing and adapting. So here's my contact information. Again, feel free to reach out and ask me any questions on all things 5-out drive in space. I'm on Twitter or X at Coach Nannen. Please feel free to shoot me a message. I'm happy to talk hoops at any time. I'm happy to share this presentation, some of the videos that we have. I'm an open book, so I'm willing to help out as others have helped me. And I appreciate you, Coach, for having me on tonight. I've had a blast.
Coach, much like you, I am a basketball junkie, and I got a hold of your presentation, and I got caught watching those videos, and I'm like, I love that, I love this, this is amazing. So I spent the better part of today watching the videos once I got the presentation, and I just can't thank you enough for joining us. So much value in what you shared, and there's lot of information. I appreciate you sharing the basics and really expanding upon it. I'm sure there's other questions and other things coaches might want to see and might questions they might have. And it's really nice of you to offer yourself out there, put your contact information. What I've learned since I started doing the social media on a bigger scale in 2019 is it's really about helping each other grow the game. And what you've done tonight has been amazing. You've learned from some great people, as you mentioned a couple of times tonight. And you're one of those people now who's offering up your services and sharing and growing the game. So thank you so much for doing that. I might hit you up with some questions myself as I go back and look and watch some of the videos, and I'm sure
Sure.
other coaches will as well. But once again, thank you very much, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Absolute blast as always. I love talking hoops. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Coach.